Hello there, good evening. You've joined us right here on India Tonight, and in this truncated version, we're going to put the spotlight on what we've just seen from the government. Prime Minister Modi unveiling the government's Saubhagya scheme. It's one that hopes to ensure that every house in the country has electricity by March 2019. Let's walk you through the contours before we, of course, cross over to our experts. The total outlay for this scheme is at 16,320 crore rupees. The gross budgetary support for Saubhagya stands at a little over 12,000 crore rupees. The REC will be the nodal agency for the operationalization purposes, and states are required to adhere to the 31st March 2019 deadline. And of course, on your screen flashing right now are really different ways in which this will be funded. But let's take it across to our guests who are joining in to give us a better sense of how we should really be reading the government's latest power push, so to speak. Anil Razdan, former Power Secretary, joins in from Delhi. We've also got Mr. M.S. Unikrishnan, the MD of Thermax, who's joining in on a live connection. And of course, our very own consulting editor, Maithili Bhusnurmat, is here with us as well. All of you, thank you so much for taking time out for us. Mr. Razdan, let me begin by getting opening comments from you. The Saubhagya scheme to ensure that every house in the country has electricity by March 2019. What have you made of it?
I think it only strengthens the resolve of the government, successive governments, to give power to all. Of course, it's 24-hour electricity to all. That is what the government seems to have decided now. Earlier, we'd resolved to take electricity to every village, but that was not enough because all homes in the villages were not electrified. Only a fraction were electrified. Now we want to take it to every home. I think it's a very laudable move, and I think if the government is going to ensure that this is a sustainable program, then you've got to also ensure that whatever is the tariff payable to the distribution companies, the money comes back into the system. I have yet to read the fine print of the scheme, but I would say that metering should be absolutely compulsory. No home should be given a connection without a meter. If your meter goes faulty, that's the end of it. Number two, the payment mechanism. The distribution companies may have to devise something similar to the cell phone companies, and that is have a prepaid cards so that each home knows what it can budget and spend accordingly. If there is a government scheme to subsidize those bills, for this I'm talking in the interest of sustainability, then transfer that money by direct benefit transfer, but please ensure that the cash flow system from the distribution end starts going up to the transmission and the generation end, because that's where massive investments have taken place. People have yet to repay their loans, and we want to take the whole sector into a momentum from where it can be self-sustaining. Of course, in this program, as the Prime Minister mentioned, we are also looking at energy security, maybe in times to come. If renewable energy is going to provide energy to some remote homes or clusters or areas, let that be done. Because it's not viable to take electricity wires everywhere, even if they're taken once. It may not be a very easy job to keep them under proper maintenance and repair. So we may have to spatially decide that which areas are going to depend on renewable power, of course 24-hour power. They will have to be given storage facilities along with it, because the wind and the sunshine don't come 24 hours. The other is that in the other areas where you're taking the grid power, again, you have an efficient system of detecting flaws that are going to come up in your system. You need smart grids. You need to keep transformers under watch. They're not overloaded. And same with transmission lines, that you have to develop self-healing systems.
Right, Mr.
Where
Razdan,
any faults in the system are immediately attended to.
Sure. I think we've established
that if you want this program to be really sustainable.
Yes, please continue.
Yeah, you see, and I think as the PM hinted, I've been saying so that there are two great advantages it will give us. One is cooking at home can be on electricity, because electricity would have reached every home. Whereas LPG cylinder will have to be transported to every home, and I think the cost is going to be much more. Number two, we should also look at electric vehicles, because if ultimately our import bill has to come down, we should try and see as many electric vehicles on the road as possible in times to come. But the transition for a vehicle change to an electric vehicle will also have to be an economically well-funded decision, because ours is not a very rich country where people can just throw away their cars and go into new ones. So there has
Mr.
to be
Razan,
a timetable.
I'd like to get the comments from our, others on this panel as well. And Maithili, that's my question, right? Mr. Razan has made a very solid case for the challenges that will come. The centre is going to spend a little over 16,000 crore rupees. Is that going to be money well spent?
Well, it is a very ambitious program, and it would be money well spent if ensure that the consumers who consume this electricity actually pay their bills. And that is why I entirely agree with Mr. Razan that the electricity companies, the discoms particularly, need to think of something like the telecom companies and have a prepaid card to ensure that those who consume electricity use it wisely and consume only as much as they can afford. If there is a section of the population that for whatever reason just cannot afford access to electricity, then they should be subsidized, but through a direct benefit transfer, not by giving them free electricity, not but through subsidies. That would be most inefficient. So this would be money well spent, provided we take care of these caveats. Because remember, discom companies are still in a mess, and we have T&D losses, a euphemism for theft, at close to 20%. So we need to ensure that it is a holistic approach and not just a very partial approach, providing electricity at a cost to the taxpayer, because these are taxpayers themselves.
Mr. Unikrishnan, let me ask you, so clearly it's going to be no mean feat, electrification by March 2019, at a time when a fifth of 120 crore Indians have no power. Is this even doable? And I just want to put it into perspective of what we've seen so far as New Delhi's power push goes. The government has managed to achieve 78% of its target as far as power for all goes.
My opinion is it is not easily doable, but with a lot of difficulties. And the money allocated may be insufficient to make it totally happen, because why these villages are not electrified or why these houses are not electrified, it's because there is no wire which is reaching to these locations. So unless otherwise we have got the microgrid creation completed and also able to spend the money on the capital side to ensure that there are transformers, there are cables laid properly, and even some of them also will need land acquisition, and then reach up to all this houses which do not have connections. I think 2019 is a little too harsh a target that the Prime Minister has given. But personally, I'm very happy. Apart from this particular scheme which he announced, the first time in my understanding and maybe experience of being associated with the industry for 35 years, and also being associated with the government in various capacities for at least 10 years, where a Prime Minister of a country could articulate so well about what should be the energy future of the country, and even the future related to electric vehicles getting added. So I'm very happy that we've got a well-informed Prime Minister related to energy. Now, coming back to the scheme, it is not going to be a total success, but I think knowing fully well it's going to be managed with the PMO, and there is an election coming in 2019. I'm hopeful that at least a good part of this will get rectified by that time. Like my colleagues earlier mentioned about, there are challenges which are related to distribution, cabling, and also the payment. There, I believe the government has already decided it is going to be a prepaid meter, and a 60% subsidy coming from the central government coming in, and 30% to be paid by the consumer, and only a 10% going to be done by the state governments. It's a very wise decision. If they were to reverse it and make it 30% by the states wouldn't have spent the money. So I have a higher hope of it happening.
Right. Mr. Razan, I want to actually ask you that. Is it wise that in this case, unlike Uday, the centre is doing all the heavy lifting? Because we know that, Uday left many states saddled with the debt of discoms. Capital expenditure growth is subdued this fiscal as a consequence.
See, in the earlier Vidyutikaran programs, also Grameen Vidyutikaran programs, which I had occasion to handle as Secretary Power also, The major funding, 90% was coming from the government of India. So here again, you see, it's one thing is you take a facility somewhere, but number one, it should be 24 hours and not 5-6 hour supply or 8 hour supply or 10 hour supply. Because once we say power for all, electricity for all, he should not have an inverter at home, he should not have a diesel genset at home. It's only in an extreme emergency that power goes out, and only the very rich should be able to keep a standby. Otherwise, it's a double expenditure. So this is one side of it. The other is the states must have a stake in it, otherwise they will not push for the viability of the program. And at the end of the day, it is the distribution company, and maybe if there's competition amongst distribution companies, when we can separate carrier from content or carriage from content, then you see we will be able to give the customer a choice of getting electricity from a better supplier. These are all stages that will have to come, and the Prime Minister also talked about a program which I have been pretty closely associated with. In fact, it was called the Bachat Lamp Yojna, which I had tried to push in 2007, 2008. And that time, the LED was totally unaffordable. So we got on to CFL, and CFLs was being priced at about 17 or 18 rupees a piece, as opposed to an incandescent bulb. But the government has done well to seize the opportunity and push very hard on the LED program. Similarly, on fans, I think we need to push very hard on agriculture pump sets for energy efficiency, all gadgetry, because it's the poorer homes, the middle class homes, who need this efficiency more than anybody else. And if their bills can come down, I think half the battle is won. They'll find this affordable. Talking of electricity becoming cheaper, I think electricity the tariffs may not fall below 3 to 4 rupees a unit, unless you see you're talking the very old hydro plants where it's hardly a few paise a unit, but that is a thing of the past. The newer hydro plants are nowhere near that. We've got to recognize that every commercial commodity has a price, it's not God-given. The good thing is that the solar prices have fallen drastically, almost to about 10 to 15% of what they were a decade back. That's very good news. We've got to see that solar manufacturing takes place in our own country, and that we are not providing 90% import opportunity for the panels, which is only pushing the economy of another country. So when we go in for a program like this, it's the right time, because our thermal power plants are running only at about 60 to 62% PLF. They ought to be running between 85 to 90 if they are the newer plants. We also have to find some money to make the older plants cleaner. And there I think the coal cess money has to be effectively utilized to revamp those plants in a time-bound manner. Because the Environment Ministry has taken out a notification which has cost implications. So I'm looking at the holistic picture. I'm only dwelling on this point because somewhere we have said that electricity will be getting cheaper also and affordable. Yes, it has to be cheaper, affordable, more efficient and cleaner.
Okay. Maithili, it's a commendable move, but it's also a master stroke in a sense, since, you know, the government clearly has an eye on the 2019 election, and it is a populist move. Let's admit that.
Oh, well, yes, certainly it was a political speech, because though the Prime Minister focused on the energy sector, he did extol the achievements of the government and spoke about how the government has, ensured access to electricity to many villages, and how there is this pledge to ensure that there is electricity supply to every single household. But let us not forget that there should be electricity that is available, as Mr. Razan said, 24/7, not just a couple of hours, because that would be electrification only in name. Just like the Uday scheme, because though the Prime Minister praised the Uday scheme, the fact is that the Uday scheme is not really a complete success. Yes, the DISCOMs have managed to get the debt off their balance sheet, but has now gone onto the balance sheet of the state governments, as a result of which the state's fiscal deficit is much higher than it was. So what we really need to have is a complete solution, and not a solution with just a little bit of smoke and mirrors. You need to ensure that when we talk about providing electricity to every household, it is actually 24/7. And this electricity is paid for by those who can afford it, and by those who cannot afford it, there the state government or the central government ensures that there's a direct benefit transfer. So that we do not have a situation where, again, we have to come to the rescue of the electricity companies. Remember, this is the third bailout package for the discoms, and this cannot go on. So government, even as it must be congratulated for taking these moves, must ensure that the success of the scheme is a complete success and not just a very superficial one.
Mr. Unnikrishnan, I have time for just one last question, and I just want you to ponder for us on the bit, that the government has said about how poor households will get free connections and will be identified based on the 2011 socio-economic and caste consensus, but unelectrified households, which are not covered under this data, will have to pay 500 rupees in 10 installments to power distribution companies. Is that an effective approach? How will this work out?
It will be the most ineffective approach that you can ever dream about. I'll tell you the reason for it. The average cost of generation of electricity in India at this point of time is around 3.5 rupees a unit of electricity. When you take an average of old plants, new plants, wind, thermal, all put together. The collection at this point of time is amounting to around 3 rupees. So already there is a 25 to 30 paisa subsidy already going to the various state governments. Now you're going to give connection to people who can't afford to pay, and in any case, if they were to be paying, they're going to be charged in the range of maybe 1.5 to 2 rupees. So for every unit of electricity that you're going to be supplying under the new scheme, Saubhagya scheme, there is bound to be a subsidy, which means the subsidy burden is going to be increasing. Unless otherwise we find a mechanism by which the person, whosoever is going to get the connection, he pays for the real cost of electricity, it is going to be increasing the burden. I fully agree there is a need for giving electricity connection to everybody, but it's not a fundamental right in the country. A person has got to pay. Already there is a very heavy charge on the commercial consumer. The malls in India today are paying almost 13 to 14 rupees during the peak hours. Industry is paying between 6 to 8 rupees unit of electricity. You cannot overburden the high-paying guys to subsidize for the lower end. So it has to come from the government, from the taxpayers' money. So whenever you give anything at lower than the average cost of generation, I always do believe that we are adding on to the problem for the future. But other social aspect of this is that we are going to give connection also. My presumption is that we are able to give the connection and make them pay. If a person is able to pay for a mobile phone maybe at 250 to 350 rupees a month as a fee, I presume he can also afford to pay for the electricity that he consumes. That is my surmise on the entire thing. Good scheme to be implemented better.
All right. On that note, we'll say goodbye to our guests, Mr. Razdan Maithili and Mr. Unnikrishnan. Thank you so much for taking time out for us, really breaking that down for us, the government's newly unveiled Saubhagya scheme that, of course, hopes to bring electricity to all by March 2019. Let's slip into a short break, but come back. More news from the government, because the slump in India's economy looks like has pushed the government to form an economic advisory council that will, of course, assist the Prime Minister. Vivek Debroy will spearhead it.